My name is Kayleen Lamb. I'm a librarian here at Lewis Library. Thank you so much for coming. We really do appreciate people being interested in citations and data, or at least I am very excited that people are interested in citations and data. Today we are going to hit a few slides, but we'll also be doing some demo. We're essentially going to be looking at two different tools. So we'll talk a little bit about EndNote, which is a citation management system, and then we'll do a demo of what that looks like. The library does provide access to EndNote, but you don't have to necessarily use that. We just suggest that anytime you're doing any sort of evidence synthesis or a larger review project, to use some sort of citation manager to make sure that you are keeping track of everything. Then we'll talk about Covidence, and Covidence is a software that we also provide access to. And Covidence is really great because if you've ever done an evidence synthesis project before, there's lots of like spreadsheets and making sure that you're doing your best to do like double-blinded screenings and things like that. And Covidence really makes it a lot easier. So in case you don't know, we are on our final Lunch and Learn workshop about evidence synthesis, so our systematic reviews, scoping reviews. And so by this point in your review journey, you will have chosen which review you want to do. You have created your well-defined PICO question. You've developed your protocol and you've deposited it in a repository so other people could view it. You have worked really hard to search for all the citations. You've created a good advanced search string. You've looked at all the different grade literature. You've selected the databases. You are ready to get into the actual meat of your review. And so today we will be talking about that point of pulling citations, performing the title, abstract, and full text screenings, and then how to set up and go through data extraction for your analysis. So I asked you a couple questions if you RSVP'd. This is kind of the gamut of how experienced people think they are with citation management. And so we have quite a lot of beginners. I've never used it. I've downloaded it. And just a few people feel more intermediate to advanced. So we will go through some basic citation management specifically with EndNote. A lot of the people who responded have not used any sort of citation manager at all. And the majority is EndNote. Since we provide EndNote, that's the one we'll be talking about, but this works for other things as well. Other information that I asked are things about Covidence and whether or not you've done any of these with this software. As you can see, the majority of people have not. And that is perfectly fine. You are in the right spot. Let's talk about what is EndNote. So EndNote is a citation management tool. It's a way that you can keep track of references. It's really good to use even if you're not doing an evidence synthesis project. But one of the beautiful things about EndNote is it integrates very well with Covidence. And so essentially you can grab all of your citations, you can put it into EndNote and keep track of them there. And then you can then import them into Covidence to then do the screening. The other kind of nice part about EndNote is it can automatically find full text documents for you, which you will need when you get to the full text screening part. And so there's ways to import and export files between the two so they work really well together. There is a desktop application, but there's also a web-based option for EndNote, and you can get that from the library website. If you would like to talk more about it, make an appointment with me. I would love to talk about organizing because it's my jam. Why you should use EndNote in any sort of review. Although Covidence does a really good job at selecting and keeping track of the numbers of citations and you can choose what sources you get them from, EndNote's really nice because it helps create a backup to your Covidence. So if anything ever happened, you would have another place where this information is stored. You can create multiple libraries to share with your team. You can also organize them by using groups or group sets. As you can see, hopefully you can see it on the screen. We'll be talking a lot about this Take on HIV scoping review. When I was working on this one, I found 270 results from CINAHL. I found 1,185 results from Embase. And so I was able to help organize things that even 3 years later, I can look back and know how many results I got from what. It also has a place where you can search for great literature. So we wanted to use a CDC paper or a white paper in the background information, and figuring out how to cite that was difficult, but I was able to find that by searching in EndNote and able to use the citation that they used. I already mentioned that you can find full text. Some of it is automated, which is really nice. There will be some full text you'll have to find by yourself, but it does help speed up the process a little bit. And then EndNote is really great when you're actually writing the manuscript. They have cite while you write. You can choose different kinds of citation styles. You can highlight something in a PDF in EndNote, and you can cite that specific paragraph and it will put it in the correct format for you. It's also got some interesting new tools like finding what journal you might want to publish your information in, and then it works not just in Word, but also Google Docs and Apple Pages. They also have AI tools, so you can ask them questions about a PDF and it can give you answers based on the text it finds in there. And of course, it will do general things like summarize. So when we do our citations, this is a general idea of what you would do. So you would input a search string in a database, and then you'll want to export that citation, usually in a .ris file, or if it's in PubMed, it's a .mbib file. Anytime you are searching for evidence synthesis, you want to document your information. And so you want to save the file and rename it to reflect the database. So as you can see on the screen, I did PubMed and then the date in which I searched PubMed. You can open that file in EndNote, create a group, drop everything into that group, and then you repeat that for other databases. And then you can export the entire thing and upload it into Covidence. And like I said, Covidence will take EndNote files, PubMed formats, or your RAS file. We are going to go into PubMed once I get into my settings and grab my search string. Okay, so this was a search that I actually did in PubMed 3 years ago to find information. So essentially, you put your advanced search string in the database that you're looking at. For this review, we started in 2013. And so whenever you're performing evidence synthesis, you don't get to pick and choose which articles you're going to use. You essentially have to scan through them all. It's the part of evidence synthesis, which can get really time consuming. So essentially, whatever database you're doing, you'll want to send all of that information to a citation manager. And so for PubMed, there's a send to button. You can come down to citation manager, and then you can choose all the results on one page, but what we want is literally all the results. And from there, you create your file. Okay, so as you can see, it's an NBIB file. And then if you have EndNote already open, you can just click on it, and then it shows up in your EndNote. Okay, so as you can see, I've got my imported references. One of the nice things about EndNote is that you can create groups, which is essentially EndNote's way of saying folders. And so if you wanted to do that, you could right click anywhere in your groups, and you could create a group or a group set. So if you have like a specific systematic review that you were working on, you could name it systematic review. And then within that systematic review, you can create a group within it. And then you would say this is your PubMed search. You can then take your imported references, Control A to select them all. then drag and drop them into PubMed. And so you know that when you performed this search on April 23rd of 2026, we found 858 potential articles for our review. Which then we would then export into Covidence. One other thing that you can do instead of just opening it, you can show it in your downloads file. I've got a lot of downloads, but here's where you would want to rename it. Like you wanted PubMed, and the date. And then you could save that within a folder. Okay. The other things that might be of interest to you all, which will help later, besides doing groups and group sets, is you can help it find full text automatically. You do that by coming up to Edit and then going into Preferences. And then there's a Find Full Text on the left side of the screen. To do that, you would need to put this specific path in the open URL path, and then you would want to put this specific path for the authenticate with. And essentially what this does is it looks at the library's databases, and it tries to connect and pull as many of those full text articles, and then it stores it in EndNote. So you can actually see the different PDFs that are there. So that can be a really helpful tool. I should also mention all of this is, this kind of information is found on our library website. So you don't have to, use your photographic memory to keep track of it. Okay. So once you have put things in groups and group sets, we'll come back later to our PubMed file, and then we'll import that later into Covidence, and you can see what that looks like. I will mention with EndNote specifically, I do find it easier when you're talking about an evidence synthesis project is to create a new library, and then you can share that entire library with people on your team. So then people on your team can add citations to it rather than sharing a group. EndNote's group share is not as robust as it could be. And so having an entire library that you share can be really helpful. Okay, we'll move on to Covidence. It is web-based, which is nice. So there's nothing to download. And it is a project management tool. So it will help you streamline the process. It is very user-friendly, and it helps you go through evidence synthesis. I will say this works not just for your systematic reviews, but they have things for systematic reviews, umbrella reviews, rapid reviews, and just your basic narrative review. You can use Covidence as a tool for that as well. And so it will essentially take you through the same kind of steps regardless of what review you're doing. So if you wanted to do a narrative review and you found like 120 results, but you only wanted to include some of them, you can still use the same inclusion-exclusion criteria areas to create that, as well as choose whether or not you want to sort them. Yes, let's use this in the study. No, I don't want to use this in the study. The other nice thing about Covidence is it keeps track of a lot of your steps. So as you are going through the title abstract, it will count things for you. So if you import something, it'll say this many duplicates were removed. And then as you go through it, it'll say, oh, you started with, 2,000, only 1,500 made it to the full text screening, or so forth. And it will create a lovely little PRISMA diagram for you that you can export into your article if that's what you're wanting to write. I do want to point out that Covidence is not a database, so you can't search for articles in Covidence. It's not a search engine. It's not a reference manager. So it will keep track number-wise for you, but it is really a project management tool. It also does not have any sort of statistical analysis software for meta-analysis. So if you are working on a meta-analysis project, you will need to export your data and import it into a different statistical software. One of the reasons it's nice is it automates the process. Way back in the day, you would have an Excel sheet with every single one of your articles listed, and then you'd say, hello, friend, you will search the first 50 and decide whether or not to include them. You will also search the first 50, then you get the second 50, so on and so forth. The problem with that is that you two are looking at the same exact articles, right? But my friend over here, their opinion might be different than your opinion. And so the fact that it is automated will help reduce the amount of bias, because two different researchers are not going to be looking at the exact same articles. And so it does help with that. It is also a blind screening process. So you can see who voted for a specific article, but it won't tell you what their votes were. So if I said, yes, this is absolutely needing to be included, and my friend over here says, absolutely not, we get a third person to do a tiebreaker. She sees that we have used, or we have both voted, but she gets to be a blinded reviewer as well. And so then she helps to make that final decision. So it's really nice because it just automatically cuts down on bias. It can be customized for your project, and this might be helpful for our faculty members in here. If you have student workers and maybe they're assistants, but they aren't subject matter experts, so you want them to go through the title abstract screening, but you want to do the full text screening, you can limit to who can be part of what part of the screening process. So that can be pretty helpful if you only want subject matter experts to be reading the full article. Covidence recently also created some AI tools, and so you can choose to turn these on or off, but as you're screening, it starts to use some machine learning and be like, oh, I see the kind of articles you like, and it will kind of push articles to the front saying these ones you'll probably want to include in your study. So depending on how you work is the types of things it will suggest. Generally speaking, a scoping or systematic review will look something like this. You create your review, you invite your teammates, you give different permissions. In there, you'll add any sort of inclusion-exclusion criteria, and that's where you can also customize your data extraction template. You then import the citations to the title abstract screening. You screen the abstracts using different kinds of criteria. And then you export the citations that need full text. It will look for open access articles, so that's like one less source you have to find. But it'll export the citations that say, hey, this got to the full text article stage and it still needs full text. And then you can then upload in a batch whatever full text articles you can find into Covidence. It then attaches it to that title, and then you can screen the full text using your inclusion-exclusion criteria, and then go into the data extraction part to collect information depending on how you set it up. So it could look like 24, 33 citations imported, all of them were screened and or they were deduplicated. Then you had 1,540 that were screened in the title abstract, and then only 286 got to the full text. And then from there, you're wanting to extract data from 88. These numbers were taken from the scoping review I did a couple years ago. So when it comes to data extraction, this is the part that people get really kind of bogged down by. People are not super excited about data extraction. It's also really time consuming. So we'll talk a little bit about the kinds of tools that are in Covidence that can help with that. But one of the things that they suggest is try to only extract the data you actually need. Some people are like, oh, we might need this because it will tell us more about A, B, or C, and then they never use it. So think really hard about what kinds of data you want to capture before you actually get through the data extraction process. All of this will be guided by whatever your protocol says. So if you're saying, in this study, we want to find the this type of intervention and this type of comparison. So both of those things need to be in the study, and we definitely need this type of population. Your population data, maybe it will be like population size, average age of population, those kinds of things. So whatever you put in your protocol is the type of data you're going to want to add to your extraction templates. In Covidence, they have two different kinds. They've got extraction 1 and extraction 2. Extraction 1 is going to be for your systematic reviews, and that's going to be Cochrane recommended. If you don't know who Cochrane is, they are the kind of gold standard of systematic reviews. It will be much less customizable. It will focus mainly on the PICO question, and it will require at least 2 reviewers to go through each of the stages. Extraction 2 is much more open. That's the one we'll look at today. It's more customizable, and you can choose to have different, either one person do the review or the data extraction, or you can choose to have 2. So it gives it a little more leeway. You can also create quality assessment templates. So if you're going to use a specific kind of quality assessment checklist, you can add that into Covidence and then automate it that way. You can adjust the data. So say you start and you pilot a couple of articles through the data extraction, you realize you need to add something, or maybe you don't need to gather things. You can adjust as needed. However, if you go from extraction 2 to extraction 1, the data doesn't go along with it. So you would have to redo any of those articles if you choose a different template. And then after you have gathered your extraction or your data, after you have gathered your data, you would then check it and then export it to then be synthesized. Okay, we will get into Covidence specifically, but this review summary is kind of what your review will look like. As you can see, they have different parts. We've got this importing references. We've got our title abstract screening. We have a full text review, and then we have some for the data extraction. In the settings section, if you're ever creating one, that's where you would put different information. And so you can name your review. You can choose what kind of type it is. You can choose what kind of question you're wanting to gather from it. And then depending if this is like a systematic review rather than a scoping review, these drop-down menus might change a little bit. And then you can choose to have like automated things or not. What's also kind of nice is you can put in your search strategy. So if you said, hey, this is the last date of my search, and you can keep track of your search string here if you would like. Here's also where you would choose how many people needed to screen different things. And here's where you would choose what kind of extraction template you would want to use for it. You can also come in here and see everyone who's been added to this screen or added to this review. You can also look at team settings and see who's actually performed any of the work. So if you are trying to project management your group and you're like, hey, everyone needs to look at 75 and excuse me, Colin, but get to work, you can see who's been doing what. And then you can also do fill out eligibility criteria. I think this is really helpful because as you're screening information, you can show this eligibility criteria. So if you're looking at the abstract and you're like, I can't remember, if we were including like young adults or if we were only looking at pediatrics, you can look to see what's included or excluded as you were screening. And so filling out your inclusion exclusion criteria is great because it keeps everybody on the same page. It is set up to go in like population, like in the PICO, but it also gives you places for your inclusion exclusion for your study characteristics, as well as anything else that you might want think would be helpful for your group. You can also create things like study tags. Study tags, when they are assigned to an article, will carry through. So if the way that I used it is if we needed to request the article through interlibrary loan because we didn't have access to it, I tagged it with that. And then you could see which ILL articles were there. So when you got the article, you could then upload it and then take the tag off. So it's a way that you can filter. There are lots of different other reasons why you could filter it, but you do have some study tags. This could also be for like conference proceedings. So if you knew it was a proceeding and you were going to have to contact someone to get the information, you could then filter for only the conference proceedings. So I'm not going to actually import more studies. I'm just going to show you what it looks like because I want to be able to get to the extraction part. But when you want to import from a file, and again, that download, you can choose where you want to import the information. So if you wanted to do that full text review and import all of your PDFs, you can do it that way. But usually you'll do the screening stage, and then you can choose your source here. There's lots of sources to choose from. However, if for some reason you needed to edit it, you could do that as well. So here you could choose, like say it was one file and it wasn't just from CINAHL, but it was like your EndNote file and you had every single of the databases. You could then say, oh, okay, I had 270 from CINAHL and I had 5 from PubMed or something like that. So that's a way that you can change things. And again, it keeps track for you. What's really nice, one other like setting, and then we'll get into kind of getting you to vote on a few of these. Here's that PRISMA checklist I was telling you about. So it shows you how many were from each of them. And so you don't have to do the math yourself. And it'll also show you how many duplicates were identified by Covidence. And then if you're looking through something, you're like, oh yeah, I've already read this title abstract. You can set it as a duplicate and then it will change this number here. Okay. If everyone would like to go into the title abstract screening, there are 294 studies to screen. And as you're doing it, you can see how many still need to be screened. Here's where you would filter for different kinds of things depending on what you're looking at. Here's where you can search for specific tags as well. If you want to just, usually the normal sort is most relevant. And so this is where that AI kind of comes in. And so the numbers will change depending on where it goes in there. So if I was reading through this, I looked through the abstract and I said, yes, this looks like, I actually don't remember if there's the criteria. You can go ahead and show your study characteristics and look through and be like, oh yeah, okay, so this one definitely is part of it, and this one is maybe. So you can literally just, does this work for the study? I definitely think it does. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, and a no. If one person guesses maybe or says maybe and another person says no, you'll do the conflict resolution, and the next person, if they say yes, then it goes forward. So maybes are kind of counted as a tentative yes. So if you have a maybe and a yes, it goes to the next stage. You can also undo. So if you're like, oh no, I didn't mean to do that, they do have an undo for the most recent one that you did. The other kind of fun options is, besides the show abstracts, you can show highlights. So I created some highlights saying, oh, I really want to look at, medical students or nursing students for the inclusion. If it finds any of that information, it will put it in green. And if it's an exclusion, so if this specific study was about online curriculum, so one of my exclusions was hybrid, or they didn't want augmented reality. So it will kind of pull things to the forefront so you can decide, oh no, we don't actually want this, or yes, we do. So I thought that was kind of a fun setting that it has. You can also see that there are conflict resolution, right? So if you go into the resolve conflicts, you can see that I voted one way and our friend Dara voted another way. And so someone gets to make that final decision. Again, it's blinded, so you don't know who voted what. And that does help move things along without bias. Okay, so once it's gotten into the title abstract screening, it will then proceed to the full text review. And so I went ahead and I added a couple of the full text, but here it would tell you whether or not you needed to upload full text. I did down at the bottom. You can show the full text here and it will open in a new group. And so then you can read through it and then decide, yes, I want to include this. No, I don't. If I wanted to exclude this one, it would also show you, give you reasons why it didn't actually go to the data extraction phase, and you can edit the list so it can get a little more focused if you need to. But if you wanted to go ahead and include it in your study, it would then again show kind of at the top, it's gonna, wait for another person to say whether or not we include it. We'll get into the extraction and then I can show you the templates. And here's where you'd also create your quality assessment template. But the data extraction template, this is, again, the extraction too. So if you're not doing a systematic review and you want more customizable fields, then you can create a template. You can use extraction 2 to be more specific with your data template. They have different ways that you can add things to your template. And this is very similar to what you'd see maybe for like HTML. So you have like a heading 1, which will like group things into different portions. Then you can add subheadings or an H2. And then you can choose for it to be an open text field, a single choice, a checkbox, or if you wanting your reviewers to fill out a table, you can do that as well. But if you wanted to say create like a subheading and we want to call this article details, you can see on the right side what the extraction template looks like. If you make any spelling errors, it essentially edits it in real time. So as you're going through it, you can then, a reviewer would enter in different information depending on what you had here. So yeah, these would be checkboxes. If you wanted to add an other option, you have some settings on the left side of the screen. You could also give instructions. So like, please take good notes on any other evidence source. So if it wasn't a primary research, you wanted to know what it was, it would then show up underneath your the question heading. So you can really keep everybody on track by providing good information if it's not something that is like obvious, like the year of the publication. So you can see here, I created one for like what country the study was conducted in, what the class sizes were. If you wanted to drill down into what kinds of participants, I created something like our student type. You can also say like, oh, I want to know why the study, how people got included in that study. So any inclusion or exclusion criteria within that study. And then you can also, like I said, create tables. No, not that one. Curricular details. Where is that? Oh, right here. So with the tables, you can add more columns. And again, let's test. You can see that it will do it automatically. And then you can add different rows. So this might also be really helpful if you wanted to try to standardize some of what people could write in that table. You could add the instruction to the extractors. So if this was not about curriculum, but was rather about like you're looking at hours versus days, you could like use formats, hour, minute, second, or something. So you can add extra information as needed. Whenever you are done with your extraction, you will then just publish your template. And if you change your template at all, anything that you've already done, you can try to keep it. You can try to get move the data with it. Okay, so as you are doing this, you can look at the extraction. So this is what it kind of looks like. So you'll have on the right is your template and on the left is your full text. And what's quite nice about it is you can like copy paste into the space, but like your publication is 2020. And as I'm looking down, this is a primary research or, you know, that kind of thing. So you can, as you are reading through it, you can start to fill out your information and then you send it for consensus. Usually you need at least one other person to look at the data that you've extracted to make sure that it is correct. If I would have created a quality assessment template as well, it would have given you a way to toggle between that as well as the quality assessment. So you could do the two things at the same time. And then whenever you are done with your, and it's gone through consensus, you can then export the data and then use it for synthesis. Okay. That was really quick. Do we have any questions about data extraction or Covidence?
Could you show us how you got to the template building part again?
Yeah, of course. Here, let me open the demo. Covidence also has a demo review that you can do, and anybody has access to this. So if you want to play around in it again, you can. But if you haven't done any of the extraction, there's a create template here, as well as in settings, you can go scroll down to the bottom and choose which extraction you want to do. And again, if you're changing, they'll give you warnings. But this is what, this one doesn't have anything in there. So you can see to create a template. And so this is what extraction one looks like. So you can choose what kinds of data you want in it. Like I said, this one looks different because it's the extraction one versus extraction two. So there's much more, there are more limitations here. Oh, at the top, data extraction template. If it's been published, it will be a white button. If it has not been published, it will be this blue color. So you can just click into there and then save it or change it. Other questions?
Do you have anything that shows like how it looks when all extraction is done?
No, but we can look. It also depends if it is a extraction one versus extraction two. Extraction two will only come in as CSV file. Extraction one will also do PRISMA and XML maybe. But let's, we'll just do all data for now. But yeah, so this will be a CSV sheet. Like I said, if you did extraction one, then it would give you a few more options of what you could prepare. The export will also be where you would want to export any of your articles that still needed full text articles, still wanted full text papers for it. I will say Covidence has great training videos So if you have questions, they've got really clear articles and things that can walk you through the process. I would highly suggest if you're getting to the export import, just to double check before you import anything. But you also have the ability to do this after today. So feel free to play around in it and see what you can find. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay, before you run away. If you wouldn't mind scanning the QR code and giving us some feedback, I appreciate your attention today.